Thanks for coming. This is our Flexible Transportation Fund kickoff webinar. Our Flex team is going to go through some guidelines and background and some history about the Flex Fund and what we were looking for going forward then. So I guess we can get to the agenda slide, Tracy, if you're going to move that forward for me. My name is Brandon Bizey. I'm with the North Dakota DOT Local Government Division. I manage the rural programs, and then you can see Kent, Tracy, and Ben are on the call as well. They'll do more of the deep dive into what the agenda actually shows us. I'm just doing a kickoff here. The Flex Fund was great for North Dakota last biennium. There was several $millions set aside, and we did an application-based program that local public agencies were able to submit applications to us and get their local projects funded. Oftentimes, they were the larger style projects that were outside the realm of maintenance type of activities, and the legislature put that money available out there. And we went through that whole process to distribute that money. We got it distributed across the state, different levels of local governments, and I think it was a great success for the state. So then this last biennium, or this last legislative session, the legislature saw the benefits of that program, and they voted to continue with that flex program. They actually increased the funding, and they designated different buckets of money for different types of projects, which was great because one of the biggest comments that we got last biennium was the program, while great, it was very broad, and the local public agencies didn't really know how to submit their applications to be the most competitive. So in this case, now we have different buckets of money for different types of projects for different agencies. We can be a little more focused on what we're looking for through that whole application process. Like I said, the Flex team is going to walk us through the agenda and the different Flex categories. From a housekeeping standpoint, everyone will need to use the Q&A feature through Teams. Your microphones are muted, so you won't be able to call in and ask the question or unmute and ask the question. We'll have to use the Q&A feature. We'll see that come through, and then we will post those questions out and make sure that every question gets answered. And if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up afterward and reach out for further information if needed. This is the first of 2 webinars. We have this one that was originally scheduled, and we've got a pretty good attendance already. It looks like there's over 100 people. We also have one on the evening of July 31 at 5 o'clock, from 5 to 7. It's going to be a lot of the same content. We just wanted to make sure that we got that out there for different people who maybe couldn't make this meeting during the day, have an evening meeting. Both of the webinars will be recorded and posted out to our Flex website, along with there's an FAQ out there, some generic questions that we get, and that we would try to answer those through the FAQ. The guidance document, for those who haven't seen, is very detailed this time around. We learned a lot from last time, and especially with the new guidance with the different buckets of money, we were able to be much more detailed than what we wanted to have in that guidance document. So hopefully everything is out there for the LPAs to be able to fill out the application and submit strong candidates for projects across the state. Next slide, Tracy, is our Flex team. I'm Brandon, manage the rural programs here in local government division. That a lot of you already know Kent, Ben, and Tracy, but Kent is the section lead. He manages a lot of the rural projects, and then Ben and Tracy are designated to the Flex program, and they're the experts. When you guys have questions, Ben and Tracy are the ones that would be the best avenue to get your questions answered. Any of us will help you, but Ben and Tracy are the designated experts. With that, I guess I can turn it over to Kent, and we can get into the program here.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Like Brandon said, I think probably everyone here knows The Flex Fund was created back in 2023 by the 68th legislature, and it was continued and expanded by this most recent legislative assembly. The total program that's available to local agencies was increased, and currently what's available to cities, counties, townships, and the state is about 230 million. I'll talk about kind of what those changes were and where that money's coming from, and then how it gets distributed. And then another change that was made is half of the prairie dog money, so the prairie dog bucket, half of that, once it's filled, is going to come back through the DOT to be distributed through the Flex Fund. So like Brandon said last time, we had and intentionally had a very broad program. We wanted to see what kind of needs are out there. It was the first time doing it. We kept it basically any project within the operational right of way was eligible to apply. Now this time we've learned a lot about running a program of this size. We wanted to keep it as flexible as possible. I think that's one of the big benefits of using state dollars instead of federal dollars, is that we don't have the same funding and project development requirements, so we can fund the types of projects that we historically couldn't fund with federal funds. In order to kind of state our understanding of the legislative intent, and then also to help us guide, the decision-making process going forward, we wrote a mission statement for the Flex Fund, kind of our understanding, at least our team and the DOT's thoughts about what this program should be. So we think it should invest in North Dakota's existing infrastructure by funding projects that reduce long-term maintenance and operation costs and improve the connectivity, efficiency, and safety of our transportation network. And so as we go forward, that mission statement is kind of going to serve as our compass for when we reviewing applications and scoring, and then also coming into the next legislative session, determining if we were successful. That's kind of what we're going to base everything on. It gives us a groundwork, hopefully provides some clarity to the people applying for the program, and avoids confusion and misunderstanding about what we're trying to accomplish. You can move on, Tracy, thanks. So where does the money come from for the Flex Fund? It's about where the money comes from is pretty straightforward. The legislature took $142.5 million out of the Strategic Investment Fund, the SIF, and then also took 25% of the motor vehicle excise tax, which is estimated for the next biennium to be about $87.5 million. That's where the money for the Flex Fund comes from. From there, it gets a little more complicated. So the projects that the furthest, the orange box on your screen, that's money that's given to the DOT for projects essentially at our director's discretion. Moving over, then there's the Flex Fund grants for non-oil producing counties and non-oil producing cities and non-oil producing counties. The next box over is non-oil producing county and city formula funds. Then grants for bridges, grants for non-oil townships, and non-oil township formula funds. The boxes that have asterisks on them are not coming through the DOT. Those will go through the Office of the State Treasurer and be distributed directly to cities, counties, and township. And all of the ones that don't have an asterisk will be coming through the Flex Fund. In addition to that, the prairie dog was modified. So once that prairie dog bucket fills up, and I believe they moved it up in the line of buckets, so it should fill up sooner. But once that does fill up, half of the prairie dog money will come back to the DOT to be distributed through the Flex Fund. The other half will be distributed by formula through the Office of the State Treasurer. There's some nuances there. For the flex fund, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the definition of an oil producing county changed. But for the prairie dog formula, it has a different definition. For our purposes, for the flex fund, oil producing counties are now defined as any county that has an average annual oil production of greater than 10 million barrels based on a rolling three-year average. So that narrows it down to for the purposes of the flex fund, there's 4 oil producing counties. Previously, it was an allocation less than $5 million in the last even numbered year. So last time there were quite a few more oil producing counties that could not apply for essentially the guaranteed funding. This time that's been narrowed down. And I don't know if there's anything else I wanted to cover before I turn it over to Ben, and he'll get into some more details about the specific funding grants. And then obviously, yes, like Brandon said, if you have questions, type them in the Q&A. We will answer them as we go. And yeah, I'll let you take it over, Ben.
All right. Thanks, Kent. The first program piece that we're going to talk about today is the grants for non-oil townships. And this is a program open to any township in a non-oil producing county that you saw from that map on the previous slide. This is both organized and unorganized townships. So the unorganized townships would have to have the county apply on their behalf, since there's no township officers or anything. But the applications for this are now open, like the rest of the program, and the townships must work with their respective county in order to apply. And that means we need contact information for some county officials. And since each application needs a written estimate for the project size, we're telling the townships that their first point of contact to get assistance with that would be the counties, either the auditor's office or the state highway or county highway office. Ask them first, and then they can either help you directly or point you in the right direction to get that estimate put together. And as part of the application process for the township portion, we have a form on our website that is a county understanding form that just says the county is aware of the project, and they sign off on, if the project's selected, that the county will accept it. This is partly because for selected projects, it's a reimbursement program. So the LPA would pay whatever bill comes in, and then they would request reimbursement from us. And the way it's set up now is we can't pay the townships directly. We have to we pay the counties, and then the counties would pay the townships. So we're just trying to make sure that everyone is aware of that process and that they're on board, and we'll be able to be a smooth sort of system once the projects are selected. We have listed just some example projects. This is not an exhaustive list of what people can apply for. A lot of these are pretty self-explanatory. Grade raise, it's just raising a road up if it's just annual flooding or other issues. Graveling of 3 inches or greater over several miles of road. We want to get away from more like yearly spot graveling maintenance projects. So we're saying, if you want to do graveling, it has to be 3 inches of depth or greater along the whole road width for a certain amount of length. We also want to look at closing gaps in the transportation network, like overall. So if you have a project that would, repair a road between, that is kind of considered a gap in the network, we'd like to see projects like that. We're looking at minor structures, anything less than 20 feet, which is pretty much everything on township roads, a lot of culverts and stuff like that. These sort of curve realignments would be eligible. Correcting steep inslopes or widening narrow roads, like slopes into ditches that are too steep, flatten those out. We also see lots of projects that address road issues from local industries. Even if you're in a non-oil producing county, you still have oil wells in your township that beat up the road pretty good. So we look at, projects to fix stuff like that. And also if a township somehow has a paved road under their jurisdiction, it's a lot of maintenance and ongoing maintenance to keep those paved roads in good order. So we've seen some projects that take those paved roads and put them back to gravel roads. That's also a good candidate for this program. Next, I'm going to talk about the scoring criteria that we're going to use for the township applications. And all this info on the next couple of slides is in the guidance document on our website. So you don't have to write this down or anything. There's a lot of discussion during the legislative session about the mill levies for townships. And what they settled on was that mill levy of 18 mills is going to be a priority for projects, it's not a requirement. So we know it's quite a process to get that mill levy adjusted sometimes. So even if you don't have quite 18 mills, you can still apply and you won't be disqualified for, at least for the grants program from the DOT. So we're asking for that information. We're also asking for the amount of money in the township's general fund. That's part of the legislation as well, just to report how much money is available for the township to do their projects, obviously organized townships only. And in the previous round of flex funds from last biennium, we awarded some projects for preliminary engineering only. There's just a handful of them. You would know if that was your project, and if you got that funded last time, we encourage those projects to apply again for the construction costs for those projects. And we're encouraging various LPAs to work together on projects as much as is practical and possible, so that if there's a stretch of road that's, say, 2 miles in one township and 2 miles in the adjacent township, we prefer not to see the project cut off just at that township line. That if it makes sense to fix the whole road at once, you'd like to see that it gets to that connected transportation network that we're trying to push forward. And there's a form on the website, and there's part of the application too that talks about coordinating between various LPAs. It doesn't have to be just 2 townships. It can be a county and a township, or city and township if that were to come up. Another criteria is if the project is bid ready, which means if all the design and permitting is already completed, and so it's ready to be bid right away, right when you get if your project were selected, that it could be bid right away. That would score some points. And then we have 2 different additional funding categories that we're looking at: outside funding and local funding. Local would be anything that the LPA would control directly. So for a township, it would be the township general fund, or if the township qualifies to get distribution money from the treasury, that they could use that money as part of a project. And outside funding would be any other grants that the township has received, or it could also be money from a private industry. So say you have an ethanol plant on one of your township roads, and they use the road a lot, they can pitch in money to fix up that road, and that would be an example of outside funding. And the last question on this slide would be if the road qualifies as a local corridor, and we have a definition of that on our website and in the guidance document. It's a pretty, we hope it's pretty all-encompassing, that definition. It's a primary route for people and goods is the broad scope of it. And there's an option to say yes or no on the application, but then on the next slide, we're going to talk about more sort of subjective answers that aren't just a number or a yes or no. And local corridor is part of that, where you describe sort of how your project fits into the local corridor definition that we have on the website and in the guidance document. And these 4 points on this chart, they're part of what we call the project needs section on the application. And it's a chance for the applicant to describe their project, describe the need for it, why they're applying. We ask that you touch on at least these 4 points. This is, you can talk as much as you think is necessary about different aspects of your project. But we want to look at how your project influences the roadway network. That's a big part of the Flex Fund, mission statement, is to create an interconnected highway state transportation network. And so if your project closes a gap, you get a lot of points for that. So if it reduces the gap in the network, at some points. But if there's if it's just a project on an existing road, doesn't affect the network at all, you don't get as many points. Or if somehow you got a project to build an all new road, that wouldn't get a lot of points, but that gets minimum points because we're focused mainly on the existing network. So we don't want to add road miles where we can just utilize the miles we have. And we want to see how your project affects, the safety of the road itself, the project's area, and also kind of and how if it's you get various points based on how you sort of describe how your projects improve safety in the project zone. So if it removes some sort of load restriction or some sort of hazard that's on the roadway, or if it widens the road or reduces the ditch and slopes, just increases safety sort of more broadly, or if there's no real changes of safety, you can describe that. We also, the goal of this program is to help reduce maintenance costs for LPAs. So if there's an ongoing issue that you see year after year that requires a lot of maintenance, like your road is overtopped in the springtime, it gets flooded. We could, the project would be to do a grade raise on that road, or replace some culverts to improve drainage, something like that. Or if your projects from the medium category can reduce personnel time, like ongoing personnel maintenance that happens on a regular basis. And that might be something like re-graveling a whole stretch of road, so you don't have to come back a couple times a year and do spot graveling, and reduces the amount of blading that is required. And then last category is if there's no maintenance reduction, or if there's some amount of increased maintenance, like that would be maybe if you took a gravel road and you paved it, that would definitely increase the amount of maintenance on that stretch of road. But we didn't see a whole lot of that the first time, but it's certainly an eligible project. And then the next thing I'm going to talk about is the grants for non-oil counties and cities.
Ben, can I interrupt you and ask some questions?
Yeah, sure.
So some questions submitted to the chat are, you talked about the September 19th deadline. Is there any value, any higher scoring if you turn an application in early?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you submit it early, we can sure review it. And if you have any specific questions, we can help you address those. We can check it for completeness too. We'll have more time now versus on the day of September 19th. I imagine we'll have a lot of applications come in. But.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to be giving final scores on the 19th. But there is opportunities for, if anything looks like it could be improved or changed, or if something's blatantly wrong, we can figure that out before September 19th and work with that local agency to resubmit the application.
Right.
Township bridges, are those covered in this grant program, or are they covered in the bridge grant program?
Any structure over 20 feet would be covered in the grants for bridges program. Anything less than 20 feet would be eligible for the grants for non-oil townships.
Yep, thank you. And then when we talk about the categories for scoring, how are the points distributed between the different categories? Are they all worth 5 points? Are they a mix? Are some worth more than others?
We're still finalizing the exact point values. It'll be hopefully pretty evenly distributed. We might weight some things more than others. It just depends what kind of direction we get from higher up to. If they want to put more emphasis on a certain part of a project, we would incorporate that, but we don't have the exact numbers for the scoring worked out exactly right now yet.
Yeah,
And we'll talk about it later, but they're only preliminary scores, so the scores are not what make the final determination of what projects are selected.
Yeah, I'll talk about the project selection process here in a little bit.
I think that's a great point, Tracy, that we are ranking these, but they do go to a committee made up of others, not just the DOT, that does make the final decision on what's submitted to the director of the DOT for final approval. I think those are the questions in the chat up to this point, and we'll probably stop again after your next section here, Ben. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. The next category of grants is grants for non-oil counties and cities, and this is all like from that map you saw earlier, all the counties that are not oil producing, so everything except those 4. And this is also for cities in the non-oil producing counties. So any city in one of those 4 counties is not eligible for this program. The way we're doing it on our end is we're kind of breaking it up into a couple of smaller categories, one for counties, one for large cities, and one for small cities. That's to help us compare similar projects against each other. So like a county highway project kind of out in a rural area isn't competing against a urban reconstruction in one of the big cities. Just to help us make it a little more even when we distribute the funds. It's the same application as the townships. It's still due September 19th. As far as the example projects go, a lot of these are pretty similar. Any minor structure would be eligible for this application process, and anything greater than 20 feet would be in the grants for bridges, which we'll talk about later. Yep, a lot of these are pretty similar to what we saw for the townships because they're rural roads that would see these kind of issues. Something specific to maybe a more urban city project would be ADA improvements. Americans with Disabilities Act, that includes stuff like sidewalks and ramps and stuff like that. Or multimodal projects, which is different transportation systems that aren't just like cars and trucks. So that would include adding sidewalks to a project or bike lanes, stuff like that would be considered in the multimodal section. And we're also looking at an example project that we're talking about the scoring section is expanding a project that's already been funded by another grant program. So I'll talk about that more later. Have some more examples for that, but a lot of scoring criteria for this grant program is similar to the township ones. Like I said, we had a couple projects last time that were funded PE only, and we'd like to see those projects apply for Flex Fund if they need it, if they haven't been already been funded otherwise. Same thing with the LPA coordination. And we saw coordination last time between different counties on projects too. So we'd like to see that, or if it makes sense for the project. Bid ready is the same sort of definition. The different funding outside sources are the same definition I talked about earlier. One thing I want to mention is for the counties, they get their Federal Highway Administration formula distribution funding, and there's a local match associated with that. But the Flex Fund is not designed to act as that local match. But if you had a project that uses the FHWA funding plus the local match plus Flex Fund dollars, that would be an eligible project. And the local corridor is obviously the same as what I talked about earlier. And then for the other categories that we're looking at, is a little bit different than the township project needs section. I want to go to the next slide. We'll talk about some of this stuff. It's a lot of it's similar, like the roadway network and the safety. We're looking at the same sort of categories for those. And There's another category for ADA improvements, like if your project would need ADA improvements, then we obviously want to see that happen as part of that project. So that's going to be a scoring criteria, and also if the project makes sense to add multimodal additions to the project, like adding a sidewalk or bike lane adjacent to the road, or in the same sort of right of way project scope, we would score points for that. Or if you took an existing sidewalk, say for example, a sidewalk that would be expanded into like a shared use path next to the roadway that you're working on, that would be score some points. And obviously all these aren't going to apply to every project, realize that, but and so trying to keep that in mind too when we're scoring these, and that's why we're also kind of separating the county projects out from the city projects. So the county project doesn't get dinged because they don't do multimodal improvements. It's just, it wouldn't make a ton of sense for a lot of county projects. And then reduce maintenance costs is similar to what I talked about with the townships. And then the thing that's I want to talk about was expansion of projects receiving outside funding. And that's if a LPA is already getting a grant or other outside funding for a project and you wanted to add to that project with flex funds, we would award additional points for that. So one example that we talked about was if a city is doing a water main replacement on a stretch of road and the grant they receive for that only includes rebuilding the road directly above the disturbed, I guess, water main that they replaced, you could apply for flex funds to cover the rest, like the width of the road inside that project, so that it wouldn't just be, a new single lane or however wide it would be. You could do the whole road at once. You apply for that. Or if you want to, another example would be if the county had use their formula funding from FHWA for a project, and that covered, say, X number of miles of highway reconstruction, you could apply for a flex fund to add miles to either end or something like that. Those are just examples. Sure, if you think of other possibilities that you think might apply to something like that, you can sure let us know, and we'll let you know if that would be an eligible cost for this, or eligible to receive more points under this category. Well, we can talk you through it, and it's always better to just throw it out there and apply, and then have us. We didn't say no to a lot of different types of projects last time, obviously, but then local corridor applies the same definition, same broad definition. It's obviously going to be a little different in the details between a township versus a city, what a local corridor is. And we have more information on that on our website if you want to get into the real nuts and bolts there. But I'm going to talk about the project selection process. Like we kind of mentioned earlier, all the applications that come in, local government office, we see those. We go through the scoring system that we have, and we assign point values. We'll eventually assign point values to each of those categories, and then we'll put those in a big spreadsheet, and we'll total it all up. And once we get all the applications together, and we run through all of our preliminary scoring, we'll provide that information to the selection committee. And the committee it's made up of the same organizations as last time. We have representatives from the DOT here and the North Dakota Department of Commerce, the Indian Affairs Commission, and then some outside partners in the Township Officers Association, the Association of Counties, Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, and the League of Cities. Each will have one member on the committee, and we'll provide our scoring. We'll provide the scoring, and all the applications and all the supplementary materials will be available to the committee. Then they'll look at what we did, and they can adjust our list however they see fit based on whatever criteria or priorities they want to emphasize. They can sure move projects around, give certain projects a big boost, or however they want to rank them. It's up to them. And then once we get those new rankings from all our committee members, we'll recompile them, average those out, and then present a list to the director. And that list will include the project cost estimates, and we'll essentially just put on the list. And we'll say we'll fund, up to, say, for the township's first $31 million for their projects will get funded. Or that's what we'll propose to the director. And then he'll make his final decision based on whatever input he wants to add. And then as part of this, we have those grants that are part of the Prairie Dog as well. And that's the same application and ranking system as just the grants for townships and for non-oil counties and cities. So you won't have to apply twice. It'll be the same one application. You won't have to say, oh, I want this for the grants program, or I want this project for the Prairie Dog. They'll all go on the same list. And so once we select projects for, say, the non-oil townships, we'll have that list, and then we'll have the next projects on that list. We'll notify, like, so if the Prairie Dog funding becomes available, and we don't know when exactly that would happen, but we would notify those applicants as well, like, hey, when this comes up, we could fund your project with Prairie Dog money. But yeah, that's the project selection process. And next, we're going to talk about the application itself.
Then I got
There's
some more
any other
questions.
questions? Yep.
Yeah, there's several came in. I'll just read them off and we can address them as we go then here. First question was, what about local roads that are gravel now? Are those eligible to be paved?
That's an eligible project for sure. If you can show the need, I guess, in your application and sort of describe why it needs to be paved versus a gravel road, then it would be considered for sure.
Yep. Why it needs to be paved and the plan to maintain it long term, right?
Yeah, especially if it's just a township road, then we would like to see, a plan, going forward for ongoing maintenance.
Yep.
Because it is more complicated than a gravel road, for sure.
Yep. Next question was about low water crossings. If a LPA were to remove a major structure and install a low water crossing, would the low water crossing be eligible to be included in their flex fund application? Yes, they would.
Yeah.
As long as it's described in the application and in the scope of work, it would. I think the question probably comes from our federal aid projects last year. We ran out of money with the federal aid and we had to start removing the low water crossings out of those projects. But with the flex fund, as long as it's described and clearly identified in the scope of work, a low water crossing would be eligible.
Yeah.
Then there's a question about facilities, building facilities, and the flex fund as it runs through the DOT as far as the applications or the grants. We are limited to transportation related projects. So no buildings.
No equipment. Yeah. So like.
Yep. There was another question here about township bridges. We'll get into the bridge program in a few minutes, but those are going to go back to the counties, what the counties prioritize as their bridges. So if a township has a structure that they want prioritized and moved up, they could put it in the township bucket application and it would be scored with all the other road projects as well. But that would be kind of a catch-all for those types of structures.
Right.
And then if there was an LPA that has multiple projects within their boundaries, one side of a city or one side of a township and another, could those projects be combined?
Yeah, if it makes sense for bidding, especially like if you want to bid, do disconnected road projects at the same time. So try to get a better bid price. I think that would make sense. I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I would say.
Yes, and I guess it's up to the applicant to see if, like you said, Ben, if those two types of work make sense to be together, or if they would be better separately, either from the application perspective or from a bidding perspective.
Right.
There's pros and cons to each, but they definitely could be. There's no reason they couldn't be.
Yeah, and if those specific questions arise, you can sure call Tracy or I, and we can talk through it.
Yep, I think that's a good plug. Reach out to Ben and Tracy early and often. Here's a question about the point values. And will we be posting the point values online once we have them determined, or the scoring?
I can't remember. I don't think we did last time, but we can. We'll usually do a. Oh, sorry, but
I don't think we're gonna do the point values just because we really want people to remember that ultimately it is not the points that finally select the project. The committee could take something that is ranked with our scoring at the very bottom and move it to the top if they really want to. So we decided putting specific point values would make people focus on that maybe too much. So that's why we just did the high, medium, low, and more than likely most of those things, it'll actually be like a range within those. It's not that there's necessarily 3 specific point values assigned, because it is still open to a lot of different projects. So trying to account for that very specifically is difficult and would not actually incorporate everything that it needed to.
Yep, I agree with that. What we walked through with the scoring was to kind of guide the applicants to what the committee members are looking for, to make sure that they've addressed all of these things more so than assigning specific points to them. Because like Tracy has said, it comes back to the committee, and the committee ranks, and we aggregate those committee rankings together.
For sure.
What is the if we have applications due in mid-September, when does the director make his final call? What's our timeline for that?
So after the applications are due, we'll need a little bit of time probably to compile our scores and get everything ready for the committee, and then the committee will meet, this fall sometime, October, November, probably, to get their final ruling and ranking. And then hopefully, I think our plan is to present the projects to the director, hopefully December-ish, and then make his final decision. So like early next year, we can send award letters out. It's kind of our ideal timeline. We'll see how it works.
Yep. Yeah. End of the calendar year is a good approximation. Here's a question about the cities and oil producing counties. With the way the language in the bill was written, this oil producing counties aren't eligible for our flex fund grants. So the question comes back then, are they eligible for the prairie dog grant? And the prairie dog distribution, I think they are eligible, but the way the prairie dog grants come back, the language in the bill directs us to use the same flex fund criteria and everything for the prairie dog grants. So no, we wouldn't be eligible for the prairie dog grant at that point. Here's a question. Would a city-owned bridge fall under the county bridge group, or can the city apply on behalf? Or can the city apply on its own behalf for a bridge improvement? The way the language in the bill was it was for county bridges. So we are reaching out to the counties for the bridges, and we'll get into that here in the next section. The city can apply for a bridge improvement if they own the bridge, but they would have to apply through the city county bucket with the road projects. If the city wanted to do something completely on their own. And I think that's the rest of the questions that we have here, Ben.
Okay.
Can move on to Tracy's piece.
Yep, turn it over to Tracy, talk about the application.
Yeah, so we're gonna walk through the application now. In a little bit, we'll walk through the website so you can see how to actually get to the application itself. But again, applications are due September 19th. You will have to do the online application to apply for the program. There is no paper copy to fill out and send in. So if at any time you're filling this out and you have questions, you can email us at flexfund@nd.gov. So the very first thing on the application is we want you to enter an email address. This email address is going to get a copy of the application once it's complete. The copy of that application will also have a link to go in and edit the application if you have any issues or something you see needs to be added afterwards. If you submit your application and this email address does not receive one, it's probably because there was a typo. But if you email flexfund@nd.gov, we can find it and get a copy sent to you so you have it for your records. The next thing is a drop down where you will select what kind of public agency you are. Townships will select this county for township. Depending on what you select, there will be different items that show up below that. So county for township, or you would select then what county you are in. From there, with a township, you have to include contact information for your county. So whether it's city or township or city, whoever is the project contact person, this is the person that is aware of more of the details of the project. And so you put their name, phone number, email address, and then we will need the commission chairperson and the county auditor, their information, because if your project is selected, then contracting needs to go to them. So we need that information for that if it is a township project. Let's see. Then townships, you'll select if it's organized or not. If it is, then you'd select yes, and it gives you an option to upload that letter that Ben mentioned that the county will fill out saying, yes, they're aware that they will have some responsibilities with your project. In a little bit on the website, I will show you where a template is for that letter so you don't have to create it yourself. Then again, contact person. With the township, this may still be the same as the chairperson. It may be a road superintendent. It just depends on the township itself. So you may end up putting the same information in here multiple times. Again, the chairperson and the clerk will have to sign contracts. The contracts are sent digitally with DocuSign, so we have to have email addresses for those to go to. And then in here is where you'll add your mill levies and your general fund balance for those priorities that the legislature made. Next up, project information. If you have a consultant engineer who's been involved in the project, then you would select yes here and you can put in their information. We do not want the engineers to put their information in for the LPA. We want it to be specifically somebody from the LPA for that LPA contact information. Again, this is just the engineering firm's name and then the project manager, the engineer that's familiar with the project. If your project includes multiple jurisdictions, so the road passes through multiple townships or a township to a county road, then you would select yes here and then you would upload that letter that just said template, which lists the LPAs that are involved and that yes, they're aware of the project, and it sets up who the lead LPA is going to be. If it involves multiple jurisdictions, you will just submit one application and the lead LPA will be the one to submit that application. Here, does the LPA maintain the roadway? If it's your road, your right of way, then you select yes. Otherwise, you select no. For instance, in the past, there are projects where it was shared use paths along state right of way. So if that's the case, then you'd say, yes, it's maintained by the DOT. And then there's a spot here where you upload a letter from the district engineer saying that they are aware of the project as well. Next, this is the total estimated cost of the project, and you will upload a PDF of that estimate. We want these to be detailed estimates, so prepared by an engineer, a county highway department, contractors, somebody that's familiar that can do an itemized estimate for the project. And then if you plan on having any funding splits between, any outside funding grants or local funds, if you could show that in your estimate as well. Next, in this box, you'll put how much money you're requesting from the Flex Fund, and then how many dollars are coming from the LPA itself. And then if you have other grants, those dollars go in this outside funding. As far as this Flex Fund requested, this is going to be what determines what that split for the project cost is, if your project is selected. So, you could put in, there's no required match, so you could put in 100% of project costs in here. But say you just did 50%, then the way it works, unless your LPA type is capped, which you can find that information in the funding section of the guidance document, is project costs will be split 50-50 until that local funds dollar amount is reached. If projects come in higher than what the estimate was, we would split it, whatever this percentage split is, 50-50, until the local entity hits that maximum dollar amount that they had here. And then at that point, the Flex Fund would cover any additional, as long as it's the original scope of work. And that applies for most LPAs, but I believe as large cities are capped at their dollar. So check out the guidance document to make sure you understand how that works. Next in this box, it's just a brief description of where the project is located. And then you'll upload a map of your project. Project length goes in here. And then this section is what are the phases that are included in the application. So if you only select construction, then construction would be the only thing that's eligible for reimbursement. If you want the possibility of preliminary engineering or other things, then it needs to be selected here. Then in this next section, you're saying what's completed. Because it's a reimbursement program and we are not capping most projects, we have to concur or agree to the costs before it's eligible for reimbursement. So if you select something here, that means it's already completed and you don't need any reimbursement for it. So say you select everything up here, but then you say preliminary engineering is already done, then you cannot come back after your project is awarded and ask to be reimbursed for preliminary engineering. This question is just yes or no if you were previously had PE funded in the last Flex Fund round. This section, you just select what is the major work type. You only select one thing from here. There's a little bit of a list, but choose what is the largest portion of your project. Then most of these are yes or no questions. Does it improve or maintain a paved or unpaved road? Is it a major structure, so it's greater than 20 feet? If that's the case, then you'd put in your bridge ID number. Minor structures, then you would put in the dimensions of that minor structure. What is the proposed surface type? An estimate of the vehicles per day on that roadway, speed limits on the road, your proposed construction year. like we talked a little bit, these applications are not due until September, and probably by the time anything is selected, it will be the end of the calendar year. So construction is not likely to be funded this year at all. So expected construction year shouldn't be until next year. Is the project ready for bid? You can see in the guidance document what we mean by that. And then here is what Ben mentioned. Does the project serve as a local corridor? You just select yes or no. But then in this project need box is where you talk about all those things, kind of on the second slide of each program, where you can talk about safety. You can describe how it is a local corridor. You can talk about the network, how it impacts that, ADA, multimodal, any of those things you talk about here. So last time, we got the feedback that, people are sick of filling out applications, and unfortunately we still have to have you fill out an application, but the decision was made to make it a little bit simpler. So this is really the only essay type question you have to do. Last time there was like 5 or 6 of them that you had to go through and explain, and they maybe didn't all apply to each LPA type. So that's why we just have the one section where you can talk about all the different reasons why your project is needed, and make sure you're covering those items that are in the scoring or in the guidance document. And then finally, if you have any other supporting information, so you've already attached a map, you've already attached the cost estimate, but if you have letters of support, pictures, traffic studies, any of those things, you can add those by clicking into this browse box, or you can drag and drop things. Then you hit the submit button, and that is when you should receive an email to that very first email address that you put into the application. Like I said, if you run into any issues as you're filling it out, email flexfund@nd.gov. That's monitored by a few of us here, so you should be able to get an answer fairly quickly, and we can jump on a phone call if we have to help you with the application itself.
Thanks, Tracy. There's a few questions that we can get through these.
Okay.
One of them was about, can you explain or reiterate how the townships work with the counties to get their applications, to get the township applications? Who is filling out the township applications, and what coordination do they need with the counties before it's submitted?
So either the township or the county can fill out that the application online. At a bare minimum, the township would need to send the county understanding letter to the county auditor to have them sign saying they are aware of the project and that they will have responsibilities for handling reimbursements and reimbursement requests if the project is selected. So that's the bare minimum that's needed from the county for the applications. If it's preferable, then the county can also fill out the application, but it's some counties have more resources than others. Some work more hand in hand with their townships, so it's up to each of them to decide how that is. We don't want to be too prescriptive because there's a lot of different situations out there, but at a minimum, you have to have that letter signed by the auditor saying they're aware that they're going to have to sign contracts and they're going to have to be involved in the reimbursement process itself.
Okay, thanks. So communication early and often,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. Here's another question about how would we consider a loan for the LPA? Would that be a local fund, outside funding, or both?
That would be local funds because it's dollars, I guess, fully under the control of the LPA versus outside funding should be grants or funding from private sources.
Yep.
For the specific project.
Exactly. Okay. Here's a question about when you were going through the application and there was the section about the major structures.
Mm-hmm.
The question was concerning the major structures also have their own bucket. when would a major structure be included in this application?
I think that would be if it's city owned or township owned, but I think for the most part, they're county owned. And so they would go through that county bucket. I think if we see counties applying for major structures in this program, we would be reaching out to them saying, you know, there's a process to go through with that county bucket, county bridge bucket.
Thanks. Here's a question about townships using an itemized quote from a contractor as their estimate. Would that suffice, or do they need to work with an engineer or the county?
A contractor would work as well.
So
Hey,
we're just looking
Brandon,
for, yeah, go ahead, Ken.
sorry to interrupt, but yeah, if the contractor estimate would be perfectly acceptable, right? The last question about county bridges, if it was part of a larger road project, let's say you have a larger stretch of road where you're reconstructing the entire road and there was a major structure in that segment, that would stay in the city county flex fund bucket. We wouldn't pull the bridge out, right? But if it was a standalone bridge, those would be considered under the bridge program. I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Thanks for that clarification. That does make sense. So a larger road project with a bridge in it would be the road bucket. When we send out the bridge app or the bridge priorities, those are going to be standalone bridge projects. So yeah, there is a difference there. Here's a question about the larger local matches. Does that make it more competitive? Is there any minimum on the local match?
There's no minimum, and there's not necessarily a scoring criteria and the preliminary scoring for that. However, some committee members may look at that as more beneficial, and that the LPA really wants that project, and that it's not just a pie in the sky type project. I think right now there's a huge amount of needs for projects. And so the concern is, are we addressing the highest needs projects first? And as the program continues, then maybe it can get into more of the nice to have projects. But right now it's trying to catch up on that backlog. So having a local match can demonstrate that the LPA is invested in the project. And if they don't necessarily have the dollars to invest in that project needs section, they could describe, you know, what actions they've taken to work towards this project besides just financial.
Yep. This question is regarding the application and the project need section of that. Is there a word limit in there, or is it unlimited?
I don't believe there's a word limit.
Okay. When applications come in, they're selecting their LPA, and then the question and criteria changes for that. Are those local agencies selecting which bucket they're pulling or want their application to go into, or is that done by us, or is that done through the application process?
So they should be choosing what LPA type they are, but that in turn does decide what bucket they go into. The legislature was very specific about what the buckets were. So there's the township bucket or non-oil townships, and then there's a separate pot that is non-oil counties and cities located in non-oil counties. That's a single bucket there. So whichever LPA, you know, type you are, that's the bucket you will go into.
Yep. And when it comes to the standalone bridge projects, that is we're going to get into that, but that is a separate application process and not tied to the application processes that we've seen thus far. So we don't have to make that distinction for standalone bridge projects priorities. Here's a question about multiple email addresses.
You can only select. You can only select one email address in that first box. So if, for instance, as consultant filling it out for their client, then they could just forward the email that they get after submission to their client. Or it's a county filling it out for a township. The county highway department or whoever's filling it out could forward it on to the township, letting them know they've submitted it at that point.
Can you talk about the county letter of approval a little bit? How do this, or did the cities need to get that county letter of approval? And who
No.
do they go to?
That letter is specifically for townships.
Okay.
The DOT is set up to be able to pay counties or cities. We can't just pay townships directly. There was also a part of the bill itself that required it to go through counties for townships. So that letter of county understanding is only for township projects.
Yep. And then there's a question about when the LPAs bid their own projects, are there certain bidding requirements, number of bids, any
And-
special rules that they need to follow?
Unless it's involving other funding, like federal funding or something that has its own requirements, then you'd have to follow that. Otherwise, it's bid exactly as you would a local project that had no outside dollars involved in it. So we don't have specific criteria on like how many bids have to be received or anything like that.
Okay. Can you kind of talk about how the county and the city buckets are split? And that kind of get into the details of how we plan to separate the county and the city projects, and then even within the city, the differences between the cities.
Yeah, so because that bucket has multiple LPA types and we understand there's a big difference between a county project and a city project, and then even within cities, you know, is it a very large city or is it a really small city? The types of projects are very different, and so a portion of that fund will go specifically to county projects. And then a portion of the fund will go specifically to large cities, which in our guidance document, you can see what that definition of a large or small city is. And then the remaining will go to small cities. So it's not, you know, the city, you know, a small city, the city of Oaks or something competing against the city of Fargo, where they're, you know, doing multimodal stuff that involves bikes and pedestrians and transit and vehicles. And, you know, the city of Oaks might just have sidewalks or something as multimodal. So trying to recognize the available resources and the types of projects that would be applied for, we are going to split out the funding between those different types.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
there will for sure be funding that goes to counties, to large cities, and to small cities.
Yep. And then the townships, they've got their own bucket too. So
There. Yeah.
I think the intent of the legislature was really try to compare apples and apples and oranges and oranges. So that makes it a little easier for us to score for sure. But it also makes it easier for the applicants to know who they're competing against and kind of level the playing field, so to speak. Yeah. Okay, I think those are the questions that I have queued up, and we can move on to the bridge process.
All right, I'm going to talk about the grants for bridges portion of the Flex Fund. This is quite a bit different than the application-based process we talked about earlier for the counties and townships and cities. This is open to all counties and their major structures. So we sent a spreadsheet to each county, their highway department or whoever is in charge of bridges, listing all their bridges that we have on their system. And we asked them to rank their priority, like their top five bridges they want replaced or rehabilitated, and the top five that they want removed. Up to five, it doesn't have to be five. And so we asked them to do those rankings and then send it back to us by August 19th, about another month to gather that information. And then we'll do some internal scoring and organizing, and then we'll re-notify counties of bridges that we want to select in around mid-October, mid to late October, to get more details, and then we'll go forward with the program from there. I'll talk more about that in the selection process, but type of projects we're looking for this portion of the Flex Fund is just bridges, just standalone bridge projects we mentioned earlier, either a removal of an existing bridge and just not replacing it, or removal and reconstruction, or rehabilitation, just redoing the deck, or new guardrails, or whatever. And a lot of different types of rehabilitation, but those are the types of projects we're looking at for the Transfer Bridges project program. And I'll talk a little bit about the scoring system we're going to be using. It's quite a bit different than the other scoring systems. It's based a lot on the inspection reports we get from, we have consultants that go on the field and they inspect the local bridges, and they give us reports with a lot of these categories are just numbers pulled directly from that report. And so we'll get into that. What type of road system is the bridge on? Is it a county major collector, or is it more of a rural local road? And you get different, this is for the replacement and rehabilitation portion. And so you get more points for that type of project if it's on a CMC versus a more local rural road. And then we're looking at, we get reports on the condition of the deck, superstructure, and substructure. And we're looking at the lowest / worst component of the bridge, and then we'll score that against all the other bridges. And it can go as low as 0, failed, and all the way up to 9, excellent. And these categories are not just like 0 or 9. There's a scale. Go 0 from, like for instance, from 0 to 9. And we'll assign different point values based on whatever number the bridge falls into for that category. And then we're also looking at the load rating on the existing bridge. If it's load posted, below legal load, or if it's fully open to legal loads. And then we look at the scour plan of action category. And not every bridge has one of those, obviously, but if they do, then we'll give a certain score to those bridges that do have a plan of action set by our inspection report. And then we're also looking at however many, like the total number of bridges per county or in a certain county versus the total number of bridges on the local system. So if a county has like hundreds of bridges that they're responsible for maintaining, they'll get a couple more points in that specific category versus a county that has only a handful of bridges. It's not to say we won't select those bridges in that county that has fewer bridges. It's just to kind of balance out and not put a more weight on one county versus another, just because there is a lot of maintenance for, and ongoing costs associated with having so many bridges. So we want to make sure that's represented in the scoring system. And then the part that we'll receive from the counties themselves is the county priority, and that is from 1 to 5. If you have more than 5 bridges, it's you only get 5 priorities. For 5 priorities for replacement and rehabilitation, and also 5 for removal, which is on the next slide. We can talk about that. So it's slightly different criteria for bridge removals. The first category is kind of flipped. So if you get more points if a bridge removal is on the rural local system versus a CMC, because theoretically the CMC really needs that bridge in place. But if it's on a more local, more out of the way place, then removing that bridge would have less impact on the local system. But also another category is the bridge open or closed. It's pretty self-explanatory. And these inspection reports that we get from our consultants, sometimes they recommend closing a bridge based on certain criteria. And so that's a yes or no question there. Then we look again at the bridge condition, same as the other replacement category. We're also looking at the square footage of the deck, like of the deck of the bridge, just based on how big it is. We're looking to take stuff off the system, like with these removals, especially stuff that's closed now and is not high priority to be replaced. So that'll help the system overall. Just removing the biggest bridges that'll reduce the amount of bridges on the system, essentially. And we also factor in the county percent of statewide bridges again, and then the county priority, they get 5 priorities for removals, just like 5 priorities for replacements. And the selection process is quite a bit different than the other applications as well. We'll assign our scoring. Most of it's just straight up numbers based on the inspection reports, all the different categories we looked at. And then we'll factor in the priorities given to us by the counties. That'll be weighted into our final list that we put together from highest score all the way down. And then we'll take that list, we'll select X number of projects for removal, X number for rehab, reconstruction, and we'll reach back out to the counties and ask for cost estimates for those specific projects. So we'll give you a certain amount of time to put those together. And then once we receive all that additional information, we'll plug that into the list, and we'll go down and say we can fund X dollars worth of removals, X dollars of rehab, reconstruction. And then we'll present that list to the DOT director again, and he'll make the final decision as to which projects are funded. And so pretty much just cutting out the committee portion of this. It's just so hopefully more data driven. And I mean, the priorities from the counties obviously have a big effect on which projects are selected, but a lot of it's based on those inspection reports, and we're trying to address a lot of bridge needs out there. That's the grants for bridges portion of the flex fund. If there's any questions about that?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Can you address how we are using the DOT's criteria, which is basically coming from the inspection reports mostly? Is there any priority given to a replacement project that does include a removal?
Yes, that was part of the legislation at one point, that we would need to, combine those two, but I don't know if that's part of our scoring system. But
it's not addressed directly in our scoring system as far as assigning it points or something like that. But from the county's perspective, moving that up with their priorities would prioritize that type of project more so. So
right, you can sure let us know that, hey, please, this removal is pretty close to this replacement, and then we can factor that in. Yes.
And then when the counties give their 1 through 5 priorities, to have that moved up within the county's priorities.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. I think that was the only question so far on the bridge piece.
Okay. About prairie dog stuff.
So, like Kent mentioned a little bit, part of the prairie dog funds are now going to be distributed using the same criteria as the flex fund. And like I said, we got a lot of feedback last time about people are tired of filling out applications. So instead of waiting for the prairie dog pot to fill and then asking for applications, which would then delay projects, another couple of years potentially, our plan is to have any project that you would want, either flex funds or the prairie dog grants to cover, should be applied for using the flex fund application. So everybody will submit applications by September 19th. will do the scoring and committee ranking, and the director will select the flex fund projects. We will send out award letters that then also have information about the reimbursement process and how that works. And then basically the next set of projects will get a letter saying they were not selected for the Flex Fund. However, they are on the list for Prairie Dog funds once those funds are available. And then when those funds become available, which the estimate right now is, I think, late 2026, early 2027, we would then send out letters to those Prairie Dog recipients saying, okay, the funds are now available. This is the reimbursement process, contract and reimbursement process that we will go through. And then anybody obviously that's not selected for either of those programs will get a letter when the Flex Fund projects are selected saying you weren't selected this time. So again, similar selection process as the grants for non-oil townships and grants for non-oil counties and cities pots. Next, we're gonna talk about our website. So probably the fastest way to get there would be to type in this address, www.dot.nd.gov/flexfund. Otherwise, if you don't want to remember that, then if you search for NDDOT, you go to our homepage, then you would go to construction and planning, grant and funding programs. Then you click state grants, and up here at the top is Flexible Transportation Fund. This takes you to the Flex Fund page. You should have come here to register for the events. Again, we have another one July 31st at 5 p.m. if you want to attend, and we'll have a recording of this posted on the website, so you can go back and see that. Again, we have our mission at the top here for the program, a brief history, and then we go into what the different programs are. Again, email us if you have any questions at flexfund@nd.gov. Right here is where you can find the program guidance. This takes you to this document. There's, again, background information. Here is that definition section where you can find out what ADA is, ADT, what we mean by economic generator, large city, local corridor, all those types of things, outside funding, SCOUR, POA, what all of those things are. This next section, this is information that pertains to all of the grant programs, so make sure you read through that. And then from there, you can go to what the specific program is that you are looking at. So, for instance, grants for non-oil townships, some background information and things that you should for sure know. Then a list of what the different priorities are according to the legislative intent of the program. Example projects. This funding section is where we talk about things like minimum project cost, how costs will be split for the project. And then we have these tables that show the scoring, just like what we had in the presentation. And anything with an asterisk is something that should be addressed in that project needs section of the application. Then it describes the selection process, and then same format for the counties and cities, how that will be done. So approximately 50% is going to go to counties, approximately 25% to small cities, and approximately 25% to large cities from this funding pot. Again, there's information in here about, non-oil counties and cities are capped at their scope of work, and large cities are capped at the amount requested in their application. Detailed cost estimates are needed. The grants for bridges, that talks about how that will work. With this one, funding, counties are responsible for covering the PE portion of the project, and the Flex Fund will cover construction and CE, or construction engineering phases of the project. And then there's a little bit here about the Prairie Dog grants. At the bottom, you'll see there's resources. There's a map that you can click here to get to that shows what those oil producing counties are. There's the North Dakota DOT right-of-way letter template a link to the district contact information so you can get them to sign it. That multi-jurisdiction letter if you're involving multiple LPAs, and that county understanding for the townships. So those links will all take you to different important information there. Here on the website, again, you'll see the different programs with just brief descriptions. You can either click this button, orange button here, or this button here for the program. It's going to take you to the exact same application. Because basically we're asking for similar information, but how you answer it will be a little different depending on the program you're in. Underneath this, you'll see application instructions. This has some information, kind of some of what I talked about when I first went through the application itself. Let's see what else. You can see here we have a map and instructions on how to use that map. For what was awarded last time. This Flex Fund results debrief, that was a presentation we gave after projects were selected last year. And it walks through how we selected everything and what the different programs were. So there's a video there if you want to watch that. And then this resources here has a lot of the same things that's in that guidance document. But map of the oil producing counties, program guidance document, this right-of-way template, which I'll show you what that looks like here. So you basically just need to fill in the date, you fill in a brief description of your project, and then you choose, which district it's going to, and you send that to have the district engineer sign it. So nothing too complicated with that letter. Then we also have the county understanding letter. Again, most of it is filled out for you, so you don't have to do too much. You enter a date, you choose which county you're in, and then you put in the township, a project name, estimated cost, and estimated construction year. Then the auditor would sign this and you would attach it to your application. Let's see, the multi-jurisdiction letter. Here you would just list whoever you have as number one is that lead LPA who's submitting the application. They're going to be the ones that request reimbursement. They're going to get the reimbursements and then have the agreement with those other LPAs about how that gets distributed. And that's all the text in this is saying, and that it's signed by those different LPAs. Next, what else do we have on here? There's a link here to get to county auditor contact information if you don't have that. We've also got a link to some historic bid prices if you're trying to find that. And then legislative report from the last Flex Fund round. These application templates, they're Word documents that you can open up to kind of collect all your information before you start filling out your application. This is not the actual application. So this is just a tool that if you need it, you can go through and fill out all your information here. So then when you're doing the online application, you have it readily accessible. So there's one of those for each of the different LPA types. And then we have our frequently asked questions down here. If anything is not addressed, again, email flexfund@nd.gov. We'll be more than happy to answer it and, add questions to this FAQ section if we need to. And we'll be sure to add a link to a video of this presentation to the website once we get that processed as well. So that is the website.
Yeah. Thanks, Tracy. I got a couple questions I can throw at you here, kind of related to the application process. Is there a way that a bridge removal can be tied to a replacement project while they're doing the rankings? And what's the best way for the Flex team to incorporate bridge removals with replacements? As we're getting those applications or those priorities from the counties.
I think it'll come down to that semi-finalist section when we're getting cost estimates. Then we'll kind of have an idea of what the need is out there and what we can tie together with the dollars that we have available. So if you can make a case for it at that point.
Because when the counties submit their priorities, that's essentially an email back to the Flex team with the
Yeah.
description of the projects, right? And it would be included in that.
No, the spreadsheet they submit back just has 1 through 5 for their priorities for removal and 1 through 5 for their priorities for rehab or reconstruction. And then once we have the ranking of stuff, we'll then email the necessary counties saying these are semi-finalist bridges for both the rehab or replacement and the removal projects. And at that point, can maybe make a case or have a discussion about adding or tying projects together.
Yep. Okay, that sounds good. Question about construction year and specifically relating to Prairie Dog. If the construction year is noted as 2026, and it falls to that second group where the Prairie Dog projects are selected, how do we plan to deal with 2026 construction after we finally find out if there's enough Prairie Dog money to be distributed?
So we'd have a conversation with the LPA at that point, or the LPA can reach out to us when they get that letter saying you weren't selected for the Flex Fund, but there's potentially Prairie Dog dollars. But it's ultimately up to the LPA if they want to delay the project or if they just want to continue on their own with
Sure.
their own or alternative funding.
Yep. So in short, it does not eliminate
No.
anything from the application process.
No, and there is no, like, just because you say it's 2026, but say you haven't even finished design and design is pushes it out later, it's not necessarily gonna then eliminate your project or anything like that.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question about the distributions. And because the DOT is not involved in those distributions, I would recommend that they reach out to the Treasury Department to find out those formulas, especially regarding the townships having 18 mills. That was put into the bill, and the Treasury Department is dealing with how they're distributing the flex funds for that out of those buckets, and then for the Prairie Dog again too, that how those rules apply. The DOT was not involved, and it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I don't want to say anything wrong on a recorded webinar. I would recommend reaching out to the Treasury Department to get those specifics.
And the legislature made some slightly different requirements for those distributions that the treasurer is following. So they're going to be much more up to speed on what those are versus we know what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, exactly. Will this program cover total asphalt street reconstruction within the city limits? And yeah, if that was put into the application, we could certainly see, as long as the committee selected that project, it would be eligible for a flex fund type of project.
I would say though, if you're looking at a project that large, make sure in that project need you're talking about how you plan to maintain that in the future, because if you've had a hard time maintaining it up to this point and then everything's replaced at the same time, all of the maintenance is going to have to occur in the same timeline as well. And so how does the LPA plan to handle that since it's not guaranteed that they'd have flex dollars every time they need it for that?
A couple more questions that have come in. Maybe these are more group questions. So we've talked about the minimum project cost. What about a maximum project cost? Is there anything like that? Any caps?
There are no caps, but, you know, if it is a very large project, then we would encourage you to consider phasing of the project. And, you know, if it's selected, it is possible that we would say you have to phase it, and then you'd get funded in future bienniums, assuming that there's flex fund dollars available for those remaining phases.
Yeah. I would also recommend, yeah, definitely propose some phases. Because if it is a large project that is selected by the committee, the DOT might have to break it into phases, and that might not be the same phases or priorities that you want. So in the application and the purpose and need section, that'd be a good spot to break that out.
I mean, it's also like last time we had almost 270 applications, so we can't in any timely manner go through and break projects into potential phases and have the committee then consider that. So if you want phasing, you should propose the phasing that you want, that is going to work the best for you.
On reconstruction projects that are selected, are water and sewer and other infrastructure like that eligible?
No, it has to be road transportation, infrastructure. Storm sewer, if it's like directly in the project, would be, you know, eligible, but no water or sanitary or other things like that.
Good. Here's a question about oil counties, and can you clarify who is eligible in oil counties for which funding pots?
Oil counties are only eligible for the Grants for Bridges program.
So townships and cities in those oil counties are also not eligible.
Yes, they're not eligible for any programs.
Yep. If a project is selected and constructed, can you briefly walk through the reimbursement process? Like how do the LPAs get their money?
So assuming it's a project that has preliminary engineering, construction engineering, the consultant engineer, or if the counties or cities doing the engineering, I guess, you would send to us what the cost is for that. We would reply back saying, yes, we're okay with that cost. And then we would include a reimbursement template. So then as work progresses, or, and the same thing would happen when you get your construction bids, you would then send them to us to say, yes, concur, we agree to those costs, a reimbursement template. Same thing with the construction engineering contract for that. Then as you get invoices or pay estimates done, those get sent to us at the Flex Fund email with that reimbursement template attached. We would, you know, make sure that like any lodging receipts that you're trying to receive reimbursement for, those need to be included. But then otherwise, you know, fairly basic information. We need to know like the time period that the work occurred, kind of general employee type that was doing the work, and the number of hours. So we can just verify that this is a cost associated with the project. If it's construction costs, then, you know, itemized list of the bid items and, you know, what's been installed. Just so, again, we want to verify the dollars are going for the projects that were awarded, and so we need to have that. Then we forward, once we have all that, we forward it to the finance department and they process the payment that then goes to the LPA. Payments are only sent out on Tuesdays or Thursdays, so depending on when we get the stuff, and there's a few people that have to go through it and check things. So it's a couple week period to get it, assuming contracts and everything are already in place. If we don't have a contract done, then we can't process any payments until that's completed.
And then generally our eligible reimbursements can go back to the date of the award.
Yes.
So as long as it was identified in the application and is in the scope, we can go back in time to the award letter for that project. Okay. I don't have any other questions coming through. So I think we can maybe work on wrapping this up with the last slide. Yeah, that's the contact team. Flexfund@nd.gov reaches a number of people here in the local government division. Or you can reach out to Ben or Tracy directly. Questions with the applications, we're more than willing to help. When we get some applications in, we'll try to give them a cursory review to make sure that it makes sense, that nothing obvious was missed. And we'll reach back out with any questions or concerns we have about the applications. The Flex program last biennium was a pretty good success. I think that's what legislatures saw, and they want to continue that. We've got more direction now, so it sounded like a lot of rules, but I think it'll make it better for everybody. For the local agencies filling out the applications, they know what we're looking for. And then for us, we've got some guidance on how these things will be prioritized. So thanks again for attending. We plan to do a similar presentation the evening of July 31. You can register through the website again. So reach out if you have any questions. And with that, I guess I'll let you all back to your day. It's almost lunchtime. So, thanks, everyone.